A hidden patch of ice sent the wagon lurching sideways. Thomas Brennan knew trouble was coming. The world tipped, supplies scattered, and his shoulder hit the frozen ground with a hard smack. The pain was sharp enough to steal his breath. When he looked up, he saw his three little boys. Their faces stared down at him, with snow already collecting on their eyelashes in the fading light. He could see their breath puffing out in little clouds. "Papa?" his oldest boy Daniel asked. Daniel was only 10, trying to act brave, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the wagon. Tom pushed himself up with his good arm. His other shoulder screamed like a stuck pig. Through the snow, he saw the wagon on its side, a wheel spinning at the gray sky. He didn't need to look close to see the problem. The axle was snapped clean in two. There was no fixing that out here. "All right, boys, climb on out now," he said, keeping his voice steady. One by one, they came down. Daniel, then Samuel, then 5-year-old Benjamin. Little Benny looked like he might cry, but he held it in. His wife, Beth, had raised good boys. He couldn't think about her. Not now. Clear thinking was the only thing that could save them. They were 15 long miles from the nearest town, and the temperature was dropping fast. A mean-looking blizzard was rolling in, swallowing up the whole world in a sheet of white. The wind howled something fierce, cutting right through their coats. "Can you fix it, Papa?" asked 7-year-old Sam. The boy still thought his daddy could fix anything. Tom wished he could. He looked from the busted wagon to his shivering sons. He knew this was all his fault. This whole Christmas Eve trip was just an excuse to run away from the empty house and the memories of Beth. He just couldn't face that quiet house. Not on Christmas. It had been a long year and a half. A year and 6 months since he'd lost her, and he was still barely holding on by a thread. He burned supper more often than not, and his boys were getting quieter by the day. Now his foolish run from grief had put his own children in mortal danger. He'd worked the railroad. He knew what this kind of cold could do to a man. In weather this bad, a grown fella might last 90 minutes before the cold took him. But for his little boys, it would be much faster. Maybe an hour, maybe less. And that broken-down wagon offered no shelter at all from the screaming wind. "We can't stay here," he told them, trying to sound sure of himself. "We'll freeze." "But where can we go?" Daniel asked. That boy's eyes looked far too old for a 10-year-old. Tom looked at his son, then out at the endless white storm. He didn't have an answer. He could stay and freeze for sure, or walk into that blizzard and maybe freeze anyway. Some choice for a daddy on Christmas Eve. But walking, well, that was at least a chance. Staying put was just a slow, cold, certain end. "We're sticking together," Tom said, grabbing Daniel's hand. "Hold on tight. Don't you let go for nothing, you hear?" Nothing makes you let go. He pulled his boys in close, about to pick a direction and pray, when little Benny pointed. His small, mittened hand reached into the whiteout. "Papa, I see something." Tom squinted, the wind burning his eyes. At first there was nothing, just snow and more snow in that big, empty Montana blizzard. But then, there it was, maybe half a mile out, a faint golden light against all that white. It had to be real, or it could be his eyes playing tricks on him. But it was their only shot. "Boys, stay close. We're heading for that light. Don't y'all let go of each other." Daniel took Benny's hand. Sam gripped Daniel's other one. Tom took Sam's free hand. He used his good arm, keeping his hurt shoulder as still as he could. The pain was like a hot wire now. It ran straight from his shoulder to his spine. They stepped into the white, that light their only prayer. Every step was a fight. The snow was drifted up to their knees, sometimes their thighs. Tom had to half-carry Benny through the worst of it. The boy's legs were just too short for the waist-high drifts. His bad shoulders screamed with every move, but the pain, it just did not matter now. Only moving forward mattered. Only that light. Daniel struggled, but he kept quiet. That boy had learned this past year to swallow his own pain. He would not add to his father's burdens. Sam fell down twice, his coat filling with snow, his little face going pale. Each time, Tom hauled him back up. He used his good arm, checked that his 3 boys were still there, and kept them all moving. Behind them, the wagon was gone. It just disappeared into the white. But ahead, the light grew stronger. It was not a trick, it was real and getting clearer. A homestead appeared out of the storm like a miracle. It was small but sturdy, built low to the ground. Smoke was pouring from the chimney, even in that gale. Tom felt something inside his chest just let go. It was hope, a desperate, painful kind of hope. He raised his fist to knock, and the door swung open. A woman stood there. The firelight was behind her. Tom reckoned she was in her mid-30s. Her hands looked tough, like they had seen years of hard work. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes took them all in with a single glance, seeing everything they needed. It was a look that came from hard experience. "Get over by the fire," she said. It was not a question. It was a command. She sounded like someone used to emergencies, who made decisions that mattered, the kind that meant the difference between life and death. "All of you now." She pulled them inside, blocking the door from the wind. The warmth hit Tom like a solid wall. Heat from a roaring fire, from a safe, tight cabin. Little Benny's teeth were chattering so hard he could not speak. The edges of his lips had started to turn blue. The woman moved with a swift purpose, no wasted motion. She wrapped the boys in heavy wool quilts. She pulled them from a chest, stirred the fire till it roared, and put a pot of coffee on to boil. She went right to the stove, starting a pot of real coffee, and put a big kettle on to heat. She did it all in under a minute with no wasted motion. She knew exactly what to do for a half-frozen man. Tom just watched, feeling a wave of relief mixed with the throbbing in his shoulder. The room was simple but warm and clean. He could see it was well kept. A pine branch sat in one corner for Christmas. 2 candles were on the mantel, and one single plate was set at the table. She lived by herself. On the wall hung a wedding picture of her and a young man. They both looked so serious and full of hope, all dressed up for the camera. His hand was on her shoulder, and her hand was over his, a perfect moment frozen in time. "Sit," she said, pointing to a chair by the fire. Her voice made it clear it was not a request. "Ma'am, we don't mean to be a bother." Tom started. "You'll sit, or you'll fall over. Your choice, Marshall." So he saw the room swaying a bit as he did. The woman brought a basin of warm water and a clean cloth that smelled like soap. Her touch was sure and professional. It was plain this was not the first time she had tended to an injured man. She told him he had wrenched at something awful, but thankfully nothing seemed to be broken. The bone itself was still in one piece. She said ice would help for the first day. She wrapped his shoulder with clean strips of cloth, her hands moving like she'd done it 1,000 times. "You're lucky," she said, her voice flat. "It could have been a whole lot worse. You could have lost the use of that arm for good." Over by the fire, Benny whispered something to Sam. Tom could not make out the words, but he saw the woman's hands freeze for just a second. She heard it, whatever it was. "Coffee?" she asked Tom, her eyes looking somewhere else. Her voice was suddenly very careful. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you kindly." She handed him a cup. For just a second, their fingers brushed. They both pulled back right away, a little awkward-like. The coffee was the real deal, hot and strong. Not that cheap stuff some folks drink. Tom held the cup in his good hand, feeling the warmth slowly creep back into his fingers. Outside, the storm was raising a fuss, but inside the cabin, there was a different kind of quiet. Something was stirring in that little room, something he could not quite put a name to. As she knelt to finish with his shoulder, he found himself studying her face, seeing the care she took. For about 3 heartbeats, their eyes met. Then they both looked away just as fast. The moment felt tense and charged all at once. Tom cleared his throat, and she stood up quickly. "What's your name?" Benny asked all of a sudden. The little fellow's voice was quiet but curious. "Speak." Some color returned to his cheeks. Her expression softened, and Tom's chest felt tight. "Catherine," she said, "but folks call me Kate." "Thomas Brennan," Tom replied, finding his voice. "We're mighty grateful." "It's Kate," she corrected. "No thanks needed for following the law." Tom understood. A light in the window was the unwritten law here. A hard rule for a hard land. When a big storm rolled in, you were expected to put a lamp in your window for travelers. And you let in anyone who knocked. It could be you next time. The wind howled outside. Kate did not need to say a thing. She just started pulling out food for supper, her actions clear. Tom knew they were staying the night. Going back out was not an option. "Storm's too mean to travel," Kate finally said. "Y'all will stay." It was not an offer, and Tom was grateful. He watched his sons. The boys watched her closely. They had seen other women since their ma died, but those women only brought food along with their pity. Kate moved differently. She was purposeful, but also gentle. It was clear she knew what it meant to care for other people. The stew was simple, just potatoes, carrots, and a bit of pork. But she cooked it with real care, adding dried herbs from her window. A warm, rich smell filled the small cabin. The boys dug in, eating like they were starved. And truth be told, they were. Tom's grief had made him a terrible cook, burning most meals. His boys ate what they were given without a single complaint. But this was different. This was a meal made with genuine care. "Slow down there, Benny," Kate said gently as the boy ate too fast. "You'll get a bellyache." Benny slowed right down, obeying her. Tom saw his other boys do the same. They listened to her gentle voice. They had not responded to anyone like that since their mother passed. Her kindness, not pity, made them want to be good boys again. After supper, she told them to explore, but to ask before they touched anything. The bedroom was simple, but the loft was swept clean and empty. There were no children's things anywhere in the house, not a single toy, no small clothes, not a sign that a child had ever been there. But a framed wedding picture on the wall caught Daniel's eye. The boy stared at it for a long moment, and then turned to Kate. "Is that your husband?" he asked softly. Tom started to shush him, but Kate just gave a little shake of her head. She did not seem bothered at all. Instead, she looked at the photo with a deep sadness in her eyes. "3 years ago," she said, her voice quiet. "The winter fever took him." "I'm real sorry," Daniel said. Tom could hear that his son truly meant it. The boy knew about loss. He knew that kind of hurt. Kate reached out and gently touched his hair for just a second. "Thank you." She started clearing the dishes and Tom stood to help, but the pain in his shoulder was sharp and made him gasp. Kate pointed him right back to his chair with a look that meant business. "You're injured. Sit down." "Ma'am, we are already imposing." "You are surviving," she said. "There is a big difference." Sam was checking out the loft ladder, seeing how sturdy it was. Meanwhile, Benny had found a little carved bird on the windowsill. He held it in his hands with pure wonder. The bird was beautiful, with every feather carved so carefully. Tom figured it was oak or maple. "Put that back now," Tom said, worried his son might break it. "Oh, it is all right," Kate said from the wash basin. "I made it. It was my winter project." "You carved this?" Benny's eyes grew wide. He looked from the perfect little bird to the woman who had made it, just amazed. Kate nodded. Benny placed the bird back on the sill, treating it like it was a precious jewel. His fingers rested on it for just a moment longer. Tom then looked closer at the windowsill and saw a whole family of birds. 5 of them, each one different from the next. He saw a sparrow, a chickadee, and maybe a meadowlark. Each one was made with such care and patience. This was more than just a hobby. This was art made by someone who had spent long, lonely winters needing to keep her hands and her mind busy. As night fell, the storm outside only got worse. The wind did not just howl anymore, it screamed. Kate laid out the sleeping arrangements with her usual calm authority. The boys would take her bed, she would sleep in the loft. Tom was to stay in the chair by the fire to keep his shoulder warm. Benny looked at the bed, then over at Kate. He had a look on his face that Tom knew all too well. It was the look he got when he desperately needed something. "Will you stay?" Benny asked in a tiny voice. "Just until I fall asleep." Tom started to say no, to explain that Miss Kate had already done so much for them. He wanted to say they could not ask for anything more. But before he could speak, Kate was already moving toward the bed. She knew what Tom, in his sorrow, had forgotten. Those boys needed more than just a roof over their heads. They needed to feel cared for, to feel safe. So she just sat on the edge of the bed, real quiet-like. Benny climbed in first, digging under the quilts. Then came Sam, a little slower, a little unsure. Daniel, the oldest, tried to act tough, but he climbed in too. One after another, they settled around her. They didn't touch her, but they got close, drawn to her warmth like cold hands to a campfire. Kate started singing, her voice just a whisper. It was an old church song, one Tom knew well. It was a song Beth used to sing while working or while putting her boys to bed, back when she was still here. Now this stranger was singing his wife's song, and Tom's throat felt so tight he couldn't get any air. He turned back to the fireplace. Behind him, he heard his son's breathing get slow and easy. Kate's voice kept on, calm and steady, singing his dead wife's lullabies to his living sons. The storm beat on the walls, but inside that cabin there was peace, a feeling Tom hadn't known in 18 months. It felt dangerously like home. He stayed awake long after the singing stopped and Kate had quietly gone up to the loft. His shoulder throbbed with every beat of his heart, but that wasn't what kept his eyes open. It was a hard and sudden truth. The storm, the accident, it had all pushed them here. But watching his boys with Kate, seeing them laugh and act like kids again, he saw the real picture. He realized something that scared him down to his boots. The storm hadn't just brought them shelter, it had brought them home. And come morning, he would have to lead them right back out the door. He'd have to take them back to that quiet ranch house, back to the lonely life they were barely getting through. The grief in that place was thick enough to choke a man. It had become their normal. Tom stared into the fire, knowing the morning sun would point the way back to all his troubles, back to his empty house and the life he was just surviving. He didn't know if he had the grit for it anymore. How could he take his sons away from the first real warmth they had felt in over a year? But what choice did he really have? Kate Wells was a stranger who showed them kindness, because that's what folks did. She had done her duty, giving them a roof in a storm. But that didn't mean she wanted them to put down roots. She surely didn't sign up for a heartbroken widower and his 3 sad boys to clutter up her life. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Tom fought a battle that was bigger than any storm. He was wrestling with the awful truth that just getting by isn't the same thing as living. His sons needed more than he was giving them. They needed more than he even knew how to give. Morning came too fast and too slow all at once. Tom woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying. Kate was already up and moving, quiet as a mouse so she wouldn't wake the boys. The storm was finally letting up, but it hadn't quit. A cold gray light seeped through the window. "Morning," Kate said, not looking his way. "Coffee." She poured a cup, careful their hands did not touch. They both knew something had changed in the night. A line was crossed, and neither one knew what to do about it. "How was the shoulder?" "Better, thank you." They sat there in a heavy silence. The wind outside had gentled some. The worst of it was over. That thought hung between them. By afternoon, the storm would pass completely. Tom could get his wagon to town, get it fixed, and bring his sons home. Christmas would not be entirely lost. "A light in the window means a traveler has to stop?" Kate asked quietly. "That is the law out here." "Yes, ma'am. So you will stay until it is clear. No arguments." Tom just nodded. A part of him felt a powerful relief. He was grateful for the excuse, for the frontier law that said he must stay here in this warm cabin, with this good woman who sang his late wife's songs and could make his children smile. The boys woke up, one by one. Benny saw Kate and broke into a huge grin. That smile hit Tom square in the chest. How long had it been? When was the last time he saw his youngest boy smile like that? So bright and happy and full of joy. Sam woke next, watching Kate with that same quiet focus he gave everything that caught his interest. The boy was always watching, trying to figure things out. Now he watched Kate with a kind of hunger. It was not for food, but for something Tom had not been able to give them. Daniel, being older, was more guarded, but Tom saw his face soften when Kate gave him a plate. The boy's shoulders lost some of their tightness, a tension he had carried since Beth's passing. "Merry Christmas," Kate said. And Tom had plain forgotten. It was Christmas Day, December 25th, 1878, the second Christmas they'd had without Beth. The second one Tom had tried to just get through like any other day. After breakfast, Kate went to her room. She came back with 3 small bundles wrapped in cloth. She set them on the table, one by one. There was a small jar of hard candy, an orange, which was a precious thing out here, and a little carved bird. It looked just like the others on her windowsill. "I made these for—" She paused, then said, "Merry Christmas, boys." Tom knew what those gifts kit, an orange in Montana this time of year, was $3, maybe $4. It would have been brought by wagon all the way from Salt Lake, packed with great care. The hard candy was a true luxury, and that bird meant hours of careful work. carved for a child she never had. "Ma'am, we cannot," Daniel said, old enough to know these were precious things. "Yes, you can," Kate said, her voice firm but kind. "Please." Benny took the bird with gentle hands, like it was holy. Sam held the orange like it was a piece of treasure. Daniel just stared at the candy, his throat tight. Then Benny reached into his pocket. He pulled out a smooth, gray river stone. Tom knew that stone well. Beth had pressed it into Benny's hand just before she died and told him it was special. Told him to always keep it safe. Benny had clutched that little stone 100 times this past year whenever he felt scared. It was his good luck charm. Now he held it out to Kate and said, "This is for you." Kate's tough look just crumbled. She took the little stone with a shaky hand. She closed her fist around it and just cried, tears running right down her face as Benny patted her hand. "It is okay," Benny said in his little 5-year-old voice. "You can keep it." Kate pulled him into a hug so fierce, Tom figured she might never let go. Then Sam and Daniel joined in, forgetting they were too old for hugs. All 3 boys and this woman, a stranger just yesterday, were all tangled up together. They looked just like a real family. Tom just stood there watching from across the room. His heart felt like it was breaking open, but in a way that started to heal something frozen inside him. After a while, Kate wiped her eyes, laughing through her tears. "Well, I have not cried like that in years." "Mama used to cry," Benny said simply. "Papa said her heart was just too full." Kate's eyes met Tom's across the room, and they just held their gaze. Neither one could look away. It was just 2 broken people, looking at each other over the heads of 3 motherless boys. 2 people who knew loss too well, who were just surviving instead of really living. "Your papa is a wise man," Kate said softly, and Tom heard something more in her voice. He could not name it, and he did not dare to. The afternoon passed quietly as Kate taught Benny how to knead bread, her big hands guiding his small ones. Tom watched her patiently teach his son. She had a patience that his wife Beth would have recognized. Sam helped set the table, learning where things went. He even learned how to fold napkins, small things that mattered more than he knew. Daniel split kindling without being told, just working steady through the woodpile. They all moved around each other like they had done it for years, like the cabin had always held 5 people. It seemed a family could be built in just one day if you had the right people. That evening, Kate made supper, and the boys had better manners than they had shown in months. Tom realized they wanted to please her, to earn her good opinion. After supper, Sam brought Kate the broken wagon axle that Tom had salvaged from the wreck. "Do you know how to fix things?" the boy asked, looking up at her with serious eyes. Kate studied the wood, tracing the crack with her finger. Tom saw she gave it the same careful attention she had given his shoulder, that same practical way she had about her. Finally, she looked up, not at Sam, but right at Tom. "I know how to fix most things," she said quietly. "Most things just need time and the right care." Tom knew she was not talking about the wagon axle. He knew she was talking about something bigger, something fragile. "We should stay forever," Sam said, and the words landed hard in the quiet room. Daniel said nothing, but his eyes did all the talking for him. They were pleading with his father, but Tom had to look away first. Hope was a dangerous thing, and he couldn't face it in his son's eyes. He told himself it was for the best, but he knew he was lying to himself. Something real had changed here. After Benny's gift and Daniel's hug, his boys were healing right here in this little cabin, and he was the one who had to take them away from it, back to an empty house where they were just existing. He felt he had no choice. That night, Tom watched the storm finally give up its fight. The snow slowed, and he knew by morning his excuse to stay would be gone. Behind him, he heard Kate singing softly and his boys laughing. It was the sound of a family, and Tom Brennan, a 36-year-old widower, felt that wall he'd built around his heart finally start to crack. A wall meant to keep him from feeling pain, from being weak. But hearing his son's laughter, Tom realized the hard truth. He had been failing them for 18 long months. Survival was not enough. Children need more than food and shelter. They need joy. This stranger had given them that in one day, more than he had in a year and a half. The storm outside was ending, but another was just starting inside of Tom. It was a storm of regret, and a tiny, terrified flicker of hope. But courage was in short supply, and morning was coming no matter what. The next day dawned clear and bright. The sun on the snow was beautiful. But it was a terrible kind of beauty, a beauty that meant it was over. The clear sky was a sign that it was time to leave. Kate felt it too. Over breakfast, he watched her pull back into herself. The easy warmth she'd shown the boys was fading away. She was protecting her heart, getting ready for the quiet to return. Tom knew he ought to say something, but the words were stuck in his throat. The right words felt like stones in his throat. How could he possibly thank her for showing his sons such kindness, only to take them back to their cold, empty house? Tom just pulled on his coat and stepped outside to face the problem head on. The cold hit him like a ton of bricks, so sharp after the warmth of the cabin. Snow was drifted up high against the walls, looking pretty in the morning sun. He walked the path they had made yesterday, though it felt like a lifetime ago. The wagon was right where they'd left it, laying on its side in the snow. That broken axle looked plain ugly in the daylight. He circled it, sizing it up. His time on the railroad told him the brake was clean through. No easy patch job here. The old wood, dried by the summer and shocked by the cold, finally gave out. To fix this right, he would need a blacksmith to forge a whole new part. That meant hauling the wagon to town, and that meant he had to ask for help. He stood there doing the math. 15 miles to town was too far to walk with 3 boys. Not in this cold. The temperature had to be close to 0, maybe even below. Trying to walk that far was asking for trouble, a risk he could not take with his sons. He needed help. A neighbor with a strong horse was his only real hope. He had to get his boys home before he lost the nerve to leave this warm cabin. The thought made his stomach clench. He just pushed the feeling down deep. As he stared at the wreck, he heard the sound of hoofbeats in the snow. Someone was coming up slow from the east. His hand moved to his hip out of habit. It was an old instinct, but he relaxed as the rider got closer. It was Ezra Coleman, the closest thing to a friend Tom had out here. Ezra, a tough 55 years old, grinned wide. "Brennan, we were getting worried." Tom explained it all, the broken axle and the good fortune of finding Kate's cabin. Ezra listened, then got down to see the damage, letting out a low whistle. "Well now, that is a blacksmith's job for certain," Ezra said, shaking his head. "But I can help you get it to town. I have my draft horse back at the house. It'll take most of the day, but we can manage it." "I'd be grateful," Tom replied. Ezra had been a good neighbor. He was never nosy, but always there when you needed him, always willing to lend a hand. "We can get started right now if you are ready," Ezra said. Tom looked at the clear sky, then back at the little cabin. He could picture his boys inside, happy in a way he had not seen in a long time. "Give me an hour," he told Ezra, his voice heavier than he wanted. The old rancher's sharp eyes saw right through him, but said nothing. "Take all the time you need," Ezra said quietly, turning to fix the wagon. Each step Tom took back to the cabin felt like he was walking through mud. The sun was warm, but a cold feeling settled deep inside him. He felt trapped. He was a father with a ranch to run. That was his responsibility. He could not just stay in a warm cabin with a woman who made his son smile. That was not how the world worked. Inside, the boys were stone silent. They knew something was wrong. Children always feel a storm coming long before the thunder rolls. "A neighbor is outside," Tom said, his own hurt making his voice harsh. "He will help us get to town." Little Benny's face just crumpled. Sam stared at the floor, and Daniel, only 10 years old, turned his back to hide the pain. "We're leaving," Benny whispered, and it was not a question. "Yes, son, we have to," Tom said, even as the boy shook his head no. "But why?" Sam asked, his quiet voice cracking. "She needs us, and we need her." Those words felt like a punch to the gut, tearing down all of Tom's reasons. It was the sensible thing to do, but it felt terribly wrong. "Boys, pack your things," he said, forcing the words out. "We leave in an hour." Then he added the cruelest words of all. "She is not your mother." He regretted them the second they left his mouth. They were true, but they were wrong. Sobbing, Benny ran straight to Kate, who gathered him up in her arms. She held him tight, and her eyes locked with Tom's over the boy's head. In that one look, he saw a everything he had been trying to ignore. She wanted them to stay, but she was too proud and too hurt by life to ever ask. Life on the frontier teaches you not to ask for things you think you cannot have. You just take what you are given, and you do not complain. Kate kissed Benny's head and gently set him down. Her voice was steady as a rock. "Help your brothers pack," she said, and the boys moved like little lost ghosts. It was a living nightmare. Kate packed them some provisions, bread, cheese, and dried meat, her hands as steady as a rock. Her face gave nothing away, just a woman doing her duty without a single complaint. A knock came, and it was Ezra. "Ready when you all are, Brennan," Papa, he said kindly. The boys climbed into the wagon. The silence in that wagon was heavy enough to cut with a knife. Even Ezra, who usually spun tall tales, was quiet. He could tell something was mighty wrong, and words just felt useless. Kate stood in the doorway with a shawl pulled tight. She handed the bundle of food to Tom. Their fingers brushed, and they both pulled back like they'd touched a hot skillet. "Your Beth loved you a great deal," she whispered. "They're good boys," she added, so low Tom knew it was a final goodbye, her way of letting them go. She must have thought he was leaving because he had to, not because he was choosing to walk away from her. As far as she knew, she had just done her duty. "Thank you," Tom managed, the words tasting like ash. He hated how weak he sounded. Kate just gave one sharp nod, then stepped back in fate and shut the door. The wagon groaned as it started to move, the wheels crunching in the snow. Ezra rode on ahead. Tom drove the wobbly wagon, his son sitting in a heap of miserable silence behind him. They hadn't gone but a quarter mile when Benny's little voice cut right through the quiet, thick with tears. "Papa," he said, "she's going to be all alone again." Tom's hands trembled on the reins. This was all wrong. The bright sun glaring off the snow was just plain blinding, burning his eyes something fierce. Every creak of the wagon wheels seemed to call him a coward and a fool. Benny's quiet sobs were tearing his heart out, while Sam just stared at his own hands, his little body shaking. His oldest, Daniel, had his back to him, but Tom could see the anger in the set of his shoulders. That boy's disappointment was a palpable thing. Tom's throat went tight, and his vision started to blur. He told himself it was just the sun on the snow making his eyes water, not tears. A man did what needed doing. You didn't complain, and you sure as heck didn't break down. You just kept moving. For 18 long months, he had held it all together for his boys. It was the only way to survive. He kept the ranch running, putting one foot in front of the other when every step felt impossible. And now it was all coming apart. "She smells like Mama used to," Benny said, his voice a little stronger. "But she's not Mama. She's Kate, and we need her." With those words, something inside Tom finally shattered. All the high walls he had built around his heart to protect himself and his sons came crumbling down. The world had taken Beth and left him with 3 boys he had no idea how to raise all on his own. Beth was gone. He realized he had been trying to keep his sons frozen in time, stuck in the past with her. He was just plain scared to let life back in, because moving forward felt like he was leaving Beth behind for good. To let go of Beth felt like betraying her memory. But Kate was not a replacement. Kate was different. She was a good woman, alone in that cabin, unable to have children. She spent long winters carving little birds just to keep the loneliness from settling in. And she had just given his 3 boys something he could not, a spark of real joy. She showed them what life could be again. And here he was, riding away from it all. He was taking them back to that quiet, sad old house, away from the first real warmth they had felt. It had been so long. He was just a coward, afraid that happiness meant risking heartbreak. He could not bear to lose someone he loved again. Tom pulled the wagon to a halt. Ezra looked over, puzzled. "Something wrong, son?" "Everything," Tom said, his voice raw. "It's all wrong." He heard a gasp of hope from Daniel. Tom turned to face his 3 boys. Their eyes were full of hope and confusion. They were his boys, Beth's boys. They deserved more than a father too broken to let happiness in. "If I went back," Tom started. His voice was thick with feeling. "If I asked her, would y'all want to stay?" 3 shouts of yes were so loud they spooked Ezra's horse. Ezra's face broke into a knowing look. A slow grin spread across his face like he knew this was coming all along. "Well, what are you waiting for, son?" Ezra chuckled. "Some chances you only get once. You have to grab them while you can." Turning that wagon around in the deep snow was no easy task. The horses fought him a bit, but Ezra helped get them pointed in the right direction. Every second felt like an eternity. What if he had read it all wrong? What if she sent them away? Finally, they were headed back toward the homestead, which they could see in the distance. Smoke was still curling from her chimney. He pictured Kate in there, all alone again. She was going back to her quiet life, with only her carved birds for company. "Go on now," Ezra told him. "I will wait here." But Daniel spoke up firmly. "No, we're all going." Tom looked at his oldest boy and saw a man who knew what was important. He knew that a family needed to face some things together. "All right," Tom said, "all of us." They rode toward the cabin, Tom's heart hammering in his chest with hope and fear. He had no speech prepared, just the feeling that this was the right thing to do for his sons. Kate deserved better too. Maybe, just maybe, they could all find something better together. Inside, Kate was just going through the motions, tidying up a table that was already clean. Her hands trembled as she washed clean dishes. She knew work was the only way to get through the silence. She just did what needed doing when your heart is breaking. You cannot fall apart, harm, because that means admitting you wanted something you could not have. The boys' coffee cups were left half full. She washed them out, but she could still feel their small hands, still remember Benny sitting on her lap. Just 3 days. And in those 3 days, they had somehow become her whole world. They filled her quiet cabin with life and made her feel needed again, to matter to someone. Now the silence was deeper and sharper than before. It was worse now because she knew exactly what she was missing. Before, a family was just a dream. Now she'd had one and lost it. The loss felt like too much to bear. Then Kate heard a wagon outside. They must have forgotten something, she thought. They would get it and leave again. She did not think she could survive watching them go a second time. But she went to the door and saw Tom walking toward her. The boys were in the wagon, 3 small faces watching with so much hope. Tom stopped a few feet away. His face was vulnerable, scared, but determined. He tried to speak. "Would you consider?" he started, but his voice broke. Kate did not need him to finish the sentence. She understood everything. She saw the desperate hope in his eyes, and in the eyes of his sons. "Yes," she said. The word was clear and certain in the cold air. Tom looked at her, confused. "I did not even ask the question yet." "Yes," Kate said again, louder this time. "Whatever it is, my answer is yes." The wagon erupted in joyful noise. 3 boys came tumbling out. They ran through the deep snow, straight to Kate, as if she was home. They all hit her at once, a tangle of arms and legs. Kate dropped to her knees in the snow and wrapped her arms around all 3 of them. She sobbed with a relief that had been locked away for years. All the lonely winters and lost dreams were washing away in that moment. These boys were not hers by blood, but they were hers in every way that truly mattered. Tom stood back, just watching his family finally come together. He watched Kate hold his sons like they were the most precious gift in the world. Leaving then would have been the biggest mistake of his life. It would have been worse than all the burned meals and lonely nights put together. Inside, Kate was laughing through her tears. Then the boys tumbled into the cabin, bringing in cold air and a whole lot of joyful noise. Kate's quiet home had never held so much life, so much wonderful, perfect chaos. Ezra appeared at the door, grinning. "Reckon you will not be needing that ride to town after all." "Not today," Tom said. "Good man." Ezra tipped his hat to Kate. "Ma'am, you have a fine family right here." "I know," Kate said softly. The pure wonder in her voice made Tom's throat feel tight. After Ezra left, they all sat around the table. The boys were practically bouncing with excitement. But there were practical matters they needed to discuss. "Where will we live?" Kate asked, her voice careful. "This little cabin is too small for 5 of us." Tom had already thought about that. "My ranch is larger, and it is closer to town. It is better for the boys. We can make it work there." Kate's voice caught in her throat. "When would we get married?" Tom took a deep breath. This was the big leap, the moment everything would either change or fall apart. As soon as the preacher can do it, he said. Unless, of course, you need more time to be sure. Kate reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time they had truly let themselves touch. Her hand was warm and strong from hard work. I am sure, she said simply. Just then, Benny climbed right up into Kate's lap, a privilege he claimed immediately. Sam leaned against her shoulder. Daniel watched it all, looking mighty satisfied, as if he had arranged this whole thing himself. Can I call you Mama? Benny asked. His voice was small but brimming with hope. Kate's eyes filled with tears again. She cupped his face in her strong, gentle hands. I would be honored, she whispered. A while later, the boys were busy with Kate's collection of little carved birds. Tom and Kate stood by the fire alone together in the busy room, trying to believe it was all real. I need to show you something, Kate said in a quiet voice. She led him toward her bedroom. She went to a small hope chest at the foot of the bed. Her hands trembled just a little as she opened it. Inside were tiny baby clothes, little shirts and knitted blankets, all folded and kept with care. She had made them years ago, when she still believed that one day she would have children of her own. Even after that dream faded, she could never bring herself to part with them. They were pieces of a dream. I made these, Kate whispered, a long time ago before I accepted that children were not going to happen for me. I just could not give them away. Tom gently touched a small gown, feeling the hope she had stitched into it. He could also feel the quiet grief she must have felt when that hope slowly withered away. You should save them, he said softly, for our grandchildren. Kate looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. Boys shoot up like weeds. You'll have a house full of grandkids before you know it. These clothes will find a good home, just at a different one. Kate let out a laugh that turned into a tear. Tom gently pulled her in, minding his shoulder. She fit against him just right, like she was made for that spot. It was like all the lonely years were just leading them right to this moment. I don't even know your middle name, she whispered into his shirt. Thomas James Brennan, he said. I was an engineer for the railroad before I started ranching. I'm Catherine Rose Collins. I was a nurse back in Philadelphia. Tom looked at her, truly surprised. A real nurse? She nodded. Trained for 3 years. I met my husband there. He was a pharmacist. We came here so he could open a shop, but he fell ill. I cared for him 2 years before he passed. And just like that, Tom understood how she'd been so calm and sure-handed with his wound. Kate was more than just a survivor. She was a professional, a healer trained to save lives. And all that training, all that skill. And she'd been stuck out here alone for 3 years. Her skills were just sitting here, going to waste. Tom thought it was a crying shame. A woman with her knowledge should be in a town, helping people. But this hard life had trapped her in this cabin with just her wooden birds for company. Well, he reckoned that was about to change. His ranch was closer to town. She could use her nursing skills again, be the person she was truly meant to be. That night, with the A's finally asleep, they sat quietly by the fire. They didn't have to talk much, just sat close, getting to know each other in the quiet. Do you ever wonder, Kate asked softly, if the storm brought you to me, or if it brought me to you? Tom looked out at the night sky. I figure it was both, he finally said. God knew we all needed finding. She leaned on him. Benny asked if I thought God sent the storm just so we could meet. I told him sometimes the worst storms lead to the best outcomes, if you're brave. That's a smart boy. As they watched the flames, Tom thought about his late wife, Beth, and the letter she left. She had known he would punish himself with guilt if she didn't give him her blessing to move on. Beth had always understood him, sometimes better than he understood himself. She loved him enough to set him free, to tell him to find love again for his sake and the boys. She wanted her sons to have a family, even if it meant another woman taking her place. I could never replace her, Kate said, as if she could hear his thoughts. You're not, he said gently. You're not replacing her. Tom spoke softly. You're what's next, what she would have wanted. Just then, Benny cried out in his sleep. Kate Rose went right to him. Tom heard her quiet words soothe Benny back to sleep. She came back holding that smooth riverstone from Benny. Tom realized she kept it in her pocket, always close. You know what he told me yesterday, she asked. He said, "Mama, I'm glad for the storm." When I asked why, he said, "Now you're not alone, and we aren't either." A lump formed in Tom's throat as he held Kate close. They just sat there, watching the stars through the window. The lamp on the still burned bright. It was not just about survival anymore. This felt like family. But Tom knew the morning would bring its own troubles. He would have to explain things to folks in town and face all their questions and sideways glances. It is a hard road, going from strangers to a family. He had to figure out how to bring two lives together. But for tonight, they had each other. And those three little boys were finally sleeping soundly. It was the first peaceful night they had had in 18 long months. There was hope now, instead of just survival. It felt like the start of something good, like healing. And for one night, that was more than enough. Tom tried to make it work back home for 3 weeks. He tried to go back to the way things were. He told himself Kate's cabin was just a dream, that the warmth he felt there was not real. But he was wrong. That warmth was real, and he knew it. The first week back was the hardest. The house felt cold and empty, a shell of what it once was. His wife Beth's things were still all around. He had left everything just so. Her apron hung by the stove, her sewing basket sat by the chair. That was her chair for the evenings. Her old dried flowers sat brittle in a jar on the windowsill. Tom had kept it all like a museum, as if Beth might walk right back through that door. For 18 months, he thought he was honoring her memory by keeping everything the same. But it did not feel like love anymore. It felt like a trap, keeping them all stuck in the past. It was keeping his boys from moving on, from truly living their lives again. The boys felt it too. Daniel did his chores, but his heart was not in it. He was just a shadow. And little Sam, well, he had stopped talking all over again. He had gone back into his shell. Benny started crying again at night. Tom could hear his quiet sobs right through the thin walls. It was a sound that just broke his heart. That first night back, Tom burned their supper to a crisp. The potatoes were burnt black on one side and raw on the other. The boys ate it anyway. Tom watched Daniel just push the food around his plate. Sam could barely swallow each bite. Benny's eyes filled with tears he fought to hide. They were all missing Kate's cooking, her warm stew. They missed food that did not taste like sadness. In the second week, things only got worse. A brutal cold snap hit, with temperatures dropping to 20 below zero. It was the kind of cold that froze the wells solid and made just feeding the livestock a battle. Tom worked from before sunup to after sundown, holding things together with pure grit. Daniel helped without being asked, but Tom saw the deep exhaustion in his boy's face. He was a 10-year-old kid trying to carry the weight of a grown man. One afternoon, Daniel looked up at his dad with eyes that seemed way too old and tired. "Pa, are we ever going to be happy again?" That question hit Tom like a punch to the gut. He wanted to promise him that good times were coming, that things would get better for them, but the words just would not come out. He was not sure if he could make that promise. In this house full of memories, life felt more like just surviving than actually living. "I don't know, son," Tom finally said, and hated himself for that honest, empty answer. The third week, Daniel finally snapped. It was over another one of Tom's burnt dinners. Tom was distracted, thinking about the cattle, about money, about anything but the stove. The scorched beans filled the small house with a bitter, choking smoke. Daniel shot up from the table, knocking his chair over. "You took us away from her." Tom stared, completely shocked. Daniel never talked back. "Danny, sit down right now. We have not talked about a thing. You just decided we had to leave and we left. Now we are here, everything is awful, and you will not even admit it. Daniel, you watch that tone. Why, nothing matters. Mama's dead and you are half dead. Sam will not talk, Benny cries all night. We could have stayed with Kate, but you were too scared." Too scared. The words hung in the smoky air. His own son saw right through him. "She is not your mother," Tom said, his voice hard as a rock. "Mama's dead," Daniel shouted, and his voice broke right in two. "And you are keeping us buried in the ground with her. She would not want this, Pa." Daniel ran upstairs, his feet pounding on the wood. Tom could hear the muffled sobs. Sam and Benny sat at the table in stunned silence, their eyes wide. Tom sank heavily into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulder ached something awful, But that pain was nothing compared to the truth in his son's words. He was trapping them all in his grief because he was too scared to move forward. He was too afraid to even consider that they might find a way to be happy again. To bed, Tom went up to the loft. He could tell Daniel was still awake just by the sound of his breathing. "Danny," Tom whispered. "Son, don't you be sorry. You were right." Daniel rolled over to face his pa. The lantern light showed the pure surprise on the boy's face. "I was?" Tom sat on the bed's edge. "Your mama, she loved us with all her heart, son. She left me a letter, told me it was okay to let love back into our lives. And I've been doing the opposite, just keeping us all stuck here because I'm scared. I'm scared of forgetting her, scared that moving forward means I didn't love her enough." Daniel sat up, his young face real serious. "But Kate ain't trying to make us forget Mama. She's just, Kate, I reckon our hearts are big enough to love them both, Pa. Mama would want us to be happy. She'd want us to have Kate." Tom pulled his boy into a tight hug. "When did you get so dang wise?" "I've been thinking on it a lot," Daniel mumbled into his father's shirt, "about how it felt at Kate's place. It wasn't better than with Mama, just different, like we could breathe. It was okay to be sad, but it was okay to be happy too. And Pa, I sure do miss feeling that way." The next morning, Tom went to check his cattle and found one of his cows all tangled up. She was caught in old barbed wire and was cut up something fierce. It took Tom a good hour to free her, and his own hands were torn and bloody by the end of it. The cow limped off, and Tom stood there in the snow, bleeding and just plain worn out. He was at the end of his rope, and then he thought about Kate and how she knew about doctoring. He remembered how she gently fixed his shoulder. If she was here, she would know just what to do. She would clean these cuts right and take care of him. But Kate was 15 miles away, all alone in her cabin, carving those little birds to get by. And here Tom was, hurting and alone, all because he'd chosen to be. He'd been stubborn and scared. When he got back to the house, he found Sam standing by the window. The boy was just staring west, out toward where Kate's place was, too far to see, but not too far to long for. "Sam," Tom said gently, "you all right, son?" Sam didn't even turn around. That quiet that had left him at Kate's was back something awful. The boy who laughed and asked questions had disappeared again. He had gone way back inside himself. Tom couldn't recall the last time he'd heard Sam's voice. Then, after nearly 3 weeks of this, something finally changed. Tom went to bed bone-tired. His shoulders ached from 12 long hours of winter ranch work, and he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. He woke from a dead sleep, and the quiet was just plain wrong. It was a silence that meant somebody was missing. Tom's heart started hammering. He felt it deep in his bones. Lighting a candle, he scrambled up to the loft. Daniel and Sam were asleep, but Benny's bed was empty, the quilts tossed aside. Then he saw them, small, wet footprints leading right out the door. Tom's blood ran cold. He nearly broke his neck getting downstairs for his boots and coat. He grabbed a lantern and threw open the door. There they were, tiny tracks in the snow. They were heading west, straight toward Kate's place, a good 15 miles away. Benny had been gone for hours, judging by the snow drifting back into the prints. The thermometer read 12 below zero, and that was not counting the wicked wind. His 5-year-old boy was out there, walking into that killing cold all alone. He was likely already freezing. Tom could not get a breath. His mind just seized up with fear. A terror worse than when Beth died hit him. He knew he had failed his boy. His own stubborn sadness had driven Benny out into the night. He shook Daniel awake. "Benny's gone to Kate's. I am going after him. You stay here with Sam and keep that fire hot. You hear me?" Daniel's face was pale. "He'll freeze." "I know," Tom said. "Bar the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Ezra." He saddled his horse faster than he ever had. His hands fumbled with the frozen buckles. Every single second was precious now. It was the difference between life and death. He rode hard, following that tiny trail. Those little tracks told a story that broke his heart. At first, they were straight and sure, like a 5-year-old on a mission. But then, after a mile, they began to wander. The boy was getting tired and cold. After another mile, the tracks were all over the place. He could see where Benny had fallen, leaving little angel shapes in the snow. But each time, the tough little boy had gotten back up, still heading west toward Kate. After 4 miles, Tom started hollering his name into the wind. Benny! Benny, son, where are you? But all he heard back was the howling wind. He felt a cold certainty that he was too late. His own fear had cost him his son. At 6 miles, the tracks were nearly gone. The boy was falling more, getting up slower. The cold was playing its tricks, making him feel warm and sleepy. Tom almost rode right by, but some feeling, made him look over at a small snowdrift. By some scrub pine. There he saw a dark patch on the snow. Tom was off his horse in a heartbeat. He fell to his knees beside the tiny shape. Benny, no, please, son. His boy was curled up like he was just napping, but his lips were blue and his small body was shaking hard. He was alive, but not for much longer. His coat was open, a mitten gone. It was the strange final stage of freezing, right before the end. Tom threw his own coat around Benny, pulling the boy's cold body against his chest. He was dangerously cold. Tom lifted him onto the horse and rode like the wind. He couldn't go home. That was 8 miles away. Ezra's ranch was closer, only 3 miles southeast. He ran that horse hard for those 3 miles, praying it would save his son. He pounded on Ezra's door. The horse was panting hard, Benny limp in his arms. Ezra opened the door and saw everything at once. He hollered for his wife, Martha. She had been a nurse and knew exactly what to do. She got Benny out of his frozen clothes and into warm blankets from her own bed. She laid him near the fire, but not too close, and gently started rubbing his hands and feet. Tom just sat there holding his son's little hand and crying without shame. He sobbed because his boy almost died, all because Tom was too afraid to choose love. An hour passed, the longest of Tom's life, but slowly some color returned to Benny's face. The shaking stopped and his breathing got easier. Finally, Benny's eyes fluttered open. Tom leaned in close, tears still falling. Benny, thank God, you are alive. Benny looked at him with old, wise eyes. I was going to Kate, he whispered. His voice was scratchy. She is all alone, Pa. She is dying too, just slower from being lonely. Those words hit Tom harder than any punch. They shattered all his excuses. You almost died, Tom said, his voice cracking. But Kate is dying too, Benny said again, with perfect kid logic. We could save her. We could save each other. But you will not let us. Tom held his son close. You are right, he whispered. You are right about all of it, and I am so very sorry. Ezra stood in the doorway. That boy has more courage in his little finger than most grown men. He was ready to die for someone he loves. The question is, Tom, are you ready to live for them? Tom looked at his brave little boy, who had tried to fix his father's mess. He looked at his friend Ezra, who had finally run out of patience with him. And he looked at Martha, who had saved his son. Yes, Tom said, his voice firm. Yes, I am willing. Then what are you waiting for, Ezra said. The sun will be up in 3 hours. Get that boy home. Talk to Daniel and Sam. Then all 4 of you ride to Kate's. You do not go alone this time. You take your boys with you because they are a part of this. You ask her like a man who knows what he wants. Tom nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Benny slept safely against his father. Tom sat in Ezra's house and made a promise to his sons and to Kate. He promised he would be brave and choose love over fear. In the morning, all 4 of them would ride to Kate's cabin. He would do whatever it took, because his own son was brave enough to risk it all for love. Now, Tom Brennan was finally going to learn to live for it. Earlier that day, Tom had ridden to Ezra Coleman's ranch. Ezra saw his face and immediately set down his work, asking what happened. Tom told him everything about his struggles and failing his sons. He was trying to hold onto a past that was gone. Ezra listened quietly, then slowly nodded. So what are you going to do? Tom said, I do not know. I need your advice. Ezra raised his eyebrows. You are a smart man with most things. But when it comes to your own heart, you are dumb as a post. Tom almost smiled. That woman saved all of you. And you left her because she said you were scared. Now everyone is miserable. You are here asking me what to do. It is not that complicated, son. Ezra told him, you go back there and you apologize. You show her and this whole town that you are choosing her for real. What if she says no? Tom asked. Ezra just shook his head. That woman looks at you and your boys like you hung the moon. She is probably sitting there wondering what she did wrong. You need to go tell that woman she is more than enough. Tom rode home with Ezra's words ringing in his ears. He lay awake all night thinking about Kate, all alone. He thought about how his family had come alive with her. He had been so busy honoring his late wife's memory. He forgot to honor her biggest wish, for him and the boys to live and love again. Opposite, it was keeping them all half alive, trapped in their grief. The next morning, Tom finally cooked a decent breakfast. It was a small thing, but it felt mighty big. The boys came downstairs, surprised to find food they could actually eat. Tom saw the cautious hope return to young Daniel's face. After they ate, Tom said, "Boys, I need to tell y'all something." They all looked up at him, waiting, almost afraid to hope. "I've been wrong. I was wrong about keeping your mama's things like she was about to walk back in. And I was dead wrong to leave Kate's place when we should have stayed." Benny's eyes got wide as saucers, and Sam looked right at him for the first time in days. Daniel leaned in, tense as a wire. "I'm going to fix it," Tom said. "I'm going back to Kate's. I am going to apologize, and I'm going to ask to court her, the right way this time. I will ask if she might consider becoming part of our family." "Really?" Benny whispered. "Really, son. But I need to know something first. If I ask her, and she says yes, are y'all truly all right with that? Because this is not just about me. This is about all of us building a family again. And I will not do it unless you are sure." "Yes," Benny hollered, jumping clear out of his chair. Sam's rusty voice came out. "Please, Pa, please go get her." Daniel just nodded, his eyes bright with tears of relief. "All right then, Aubushin," Tom said, feeling a knot in his chest finally loosen. A knot that had been tied tight for the whole 18 months since Beth passed. "I'll go tomorrow, and boys, I promise I'll do this right. I will court her properly. I'll make sure she knows this is real, that we are all choosing her, that she is wanted for who she is." That night, Tom started sorting through Beth's things, not to pack her away, but to make room for someone new while still honoring the memory of who had been there before. He carefully set aside the important things for the boys, like her wedding ring for Daniel when he was grown. He saved her favorite blue shawl, the one that still smelled a little bit like lavender, and the family Bible, with all her handwritten notes and prayers in the margins. But the daily things, the things that kept the house frozen in time, he began to put them away. The apron came off its hook. The sewing basket was moved up to the attic. They were preserved for memory, not for daily haunting. As he worked, Tom found himself talking to Beth, right there in the quiet kitchen. "I met someone," he said softly. "Her name is Kate, Kate Wells. She is a widow too, and Beth, she is just wonderful with our boys. They came alive around her. Really alive. She has this quiet strength, a lot like you did. Different, but the same too." He folded the apron with care, holding it for just a moment. "I am going to court her proper, and if she will have us, I am going to marry her. Her, I hope you understand, Beth. Up there in heaven, I hope you know I will never forget you. The boys will not either. But like you said in your letter, we have to live. We have to live, not just survive." The kitchen was quiet, no sign from above, just Tom. He held her apron, wrestling with his own hopes. But in that silence, he felt a certain peace. He felt like maybe, just maybe, Beth would approve. The next morning, Tom woke the boys before sunrise. He told them, "We're going to Kate's, all of us, right now." They dressed faster than ever. Little Benny put his shirt on backward and did not even care. Sam actually smiled, a real one. Daniel, being the oldest, helped his little brothers get ready, making sure they were bundled up warm. Tom saddled the horses and hitching the wagon, his hands shaking just a little bit. What if Kate had moved on? What if she had decided she was better off by herself? But he had to take this chance. It was a risk he had to take for his boys. They deserved a shot at happiness. And he reckoned, so did he. So did Kate. They set out as the sun came up. The trip to Kate's homestead took 3 long hours. The horses moved slow and careful through the snow. The boys were quiet, but it was a good kind of quiet. It was the quiet of hope, not the heavy silence of grief. As they got closer, Tom's heart pounded. Then he saw it, smoke from her chimney. She was home. That was the first step. Now he just had to find the courage to knock on that door and say what needed to be said. They pulled up right in front of the cabin. Tom helped all three of his boys out of the wagon. For a moment, all four of them just stood there, staring at the place that felt more like home than their own ranch. "Y'all wait here," Tom said, his voice low. "Let me talk to her first." He walked toward the door. His legs felt unsteady. He raised his hand to knock, but then he froze. He saw her through the window. Kate was at her table carving another wooden bird, another project to pass another lonely season. Her head was bent over her work, and she looked smaller than he remembered. She looked so alone. The cabin, which had felt so warm and alive with his family there, now just looked empty. It was a place for surviving, not for living. Tom finally knocked. Kate looked up, startled. She clearly was not expecting company. When she saw it was him, her face went through a storm of feelings. Surprise, then hope, and then a little bit of fear, all in just a second or two. She settled her expression as she got up and came to the door, wrapping a shawl around herself. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice polite but 1,000 miles away. "Kate," Tom said, his own voice rough, "can I talk with you?" She glanced past him and saw the boys. Her face softened for just a moment. She schooled her face. "Sure, come on in." She stood aside, letting him into the cabin he remembered so well. It was clean and simple, warmed by the fire. A new little wooden bird sat on the windowsill, not yet painted. Another sign of a long winter spent alone. Kate finally spoke. "The boys? They're fine, just mighty cold. Can I bring them in?" Kate simply nodded, so Tom went to get his sons. When Kate looked at the boys, Tom saw her whole face soften. The love she felt for them was plain as day. He knew right then she had missed them something fierce. "Howdy, boys," she said, her voice soft as cotton. "Hi, Miss Kate," Benny whispered back. Her eyes locked on Tom. "What brings you all out here in this weather?" Her gaze was steady. "Are you just here to leave again?" Tom took a breath. "Kate, I came to say I am sorry. 3 weeks ago, I made a terrible mistake. I never should have left. I truly thought I was doing the right thing. I thought it was what my late wife would have wanted, but I was just plain wrong." Kate listened, her face like stone, but he saw her knuckles were white where she gripped her shawl. So Tom told her everything that had happened. He told her about Beth's letter, Daniel's angry words, and little Benny walking out into that freezing night. And he told her how he finally understood he was trapping them all in sadness. "So I am asking for a chance to court you proper," he finished. "I want to do it right for the whole world to see, to show you that this is real and that you matter to me. I am choosing you, Kate. This is not settling." She stood there for a long moment, not saying a word, but her eyes were swimming with old hurt. Her voice came out quiet, but solid as a rock. "No." Behind him, Benny gasped. Tom felt his boy's heart break. "No," he whispered, barely breathing. Kate's voice trembled, but she held her ground. "That's right, Tom. I will not be the woman you come to last. I deserve better than to be your backup plan." "But Kate, you are not a plan." "That is exactly how it feels," she cried. "You left, you chose your memories over me, and now you just expect to come back? And I am just supposed to welcome you with open arms? Forget how much it hurt to watch you ride away." "Please, just listen to me," he begged. "I said no." She started to shut the door, but a small voice cried out, "Mama Kate, please." It was Benny, his voice cracking with tears. Suddenly, all three boys were scrambling out of the wagon. They ran right through the snow and threw themselves at Kate, sending them all tumbling into a heap. The boys were all crying, holding on to her like she was the only thing keeping them afloat in a storm. "Please do not say no," Benny sobbed into her coat. "We need you, Mama Kate. We love you so much. Papa was just scared, but he is not scared now. Please give him a chance." Kate just held them close, her own tears finally falling. She looked up at Tom, and he saw it all in her eyes. The hurt, the love, and a flicker of hope she could not quite snuff out. Her voice was rough with emotion. Get inside, she said, all of y'all, before you catch your death of cold. They all stumbled inside the warm cabin. Kate wiped her eyes and stood tall. When she spoke, her voice was steady. All right then, if. All right, Tom, but I have some conditions, she stated firmly. Real ones, not just empty promises. You will prove this is real. You will introduce me to everyone and make it clear I am not just a convenience. And you'll tell me about Beth, so I'm not fighting a memory. I need all the time it takes to trust you again. Tom met her gaze, seeing the hurt that needed mending. Yes, he said, I can do all of that. For however long it takes, he promised. Kate glanced at the boys' hopeful faces, then back at Tom. She saw a new certainty in his eyes, a true commitment. All right, she said softly, you can court me, Tom Brennan, but if you break my heart again, there will not be a third chance. I will not, he swore. Over the next 4 weeks, Tom courted Kate the proper way. He rode to her cabin twice a week, always with a chaperone like Ezra and Martha. He brought small, thoughtful gifts that showed he was thinking of her. A book she had admired, or a new carving knife when he noticed hers was getting dull. And during those visits, they finally talked. Tom opened up about his late wife, Beth. He shared stories of their life together. It was hard, but it was a part of his healing. It helped him remember Beth as a real person, not just a saint he'd built in his grief. He saw that his heart was big enough to love Kate without lessening what he had had with Beth. In turn, Kate told him about her husband, Michael, in the pharmacy they had dreamed of. She spoke of his long illness and the deep loneliness she'd felt for 3 long years. She admitted that some dreams do not pan out the way you expect them to. But sometimes, she said, new dreams come along. I have 3 boys right here who need a mother. It is not the life I planned, but it feels like the life I needed. Tom then started bringing the boys for visits. Kate began teaching them things. She taught Daniel how to read the signs of the weather. She showed Sam which wild plants could be used for healing and let him help her prepare them. And she gently guided little Benny's hands, teaching him the art of carving wood. With her help, he learned to shape a simple block of wood into something beautiful. Of course, the whole town noticed. Gossip travels fast in a small community. Tom proudly took Kate to church on Sundays and introduced her to all the families. He made it plain for all to see that this was a serious courtship, born of choice, not need. Many people, like Ezra and Martha, were happy for them, but some of the older women, led by Abigail Hartford, were not so sure. One Sunday, Mrs. Hartford walked right up to Tom after the church service was over. Mrs. Hartford's face was stern. Mr. Brennan, a word. Tom replied, Of course, ma'am. I knew your Beth, she said plainly. She was a fine woman, a good mother, gone too soon. Yes, ma'am, Tom agreed, unsure of her point. And Catherine Wells has been a good neighbor these 3 years. Mrs. Hartford listed Kate's good deeds, from birthing twins to treating pneumonia. She's skilled and kind, but this seems fast, she said. Beth's only been gone 18 months. Folks are wondering if you're just looking for a housekeeper. A flash of anger hit Tom, but he knew she wasn't being cruel, just protective. She had raised 3 children all by herself and understood hardship. Mrs. Hartford, may I show you something? He asked, and she nodded. Tom pulled out Beth's letter. Before she passed, she left me this. She asked me to find love again, for my sake and the boys. He handed her the letter and watched her face soften as she read Beth's words. She gave you her permission, Mrs. Hartford said in a soft voice. More than that, she asked me to, Tom said. I fought it hard for 18 long months. I nearly lost myself and my boys to grief. Then we met Kate. For the first time in a year and a half, my boys were truly happy. I realized honoring Beth meant living the life she wanted for us. Mrs. Hartford's eyes were damp. Your Beth was a wise woman. And you're a good man, Thomas Brennan. Kate is lucky to have you. Then you have my blessing, she declared, from an old widow who has seen too much sorrow. With Abigail Hartford's approval, the rest of the town's worries faded away. Soon everyone knew Tom Brennan was courting Kate Wells with honorable intentions. 2 weeks later, they were in court. The whole town seemed to be there for them, and Ezra, Martha, John Peterson, and others Kate had helped came to testify. Across the aisle, Hiram Wells sat looking smug and sure he would win. But when Tom's lawyer, Samuel Rogers, presented the case, everything changed. He showed proof the debt belonged to Michael alone from before the marriage. Under territorial law, Kate was simply not responsible for it. Then came the big surprise of his. Michael Wells had written a letter to Kate before he died. The letter clearly stated that any money he borrowed from Hiram was his debt alone was all the proof they needed. Judge Henderson read the papers, then gave Hiram a look as cold as a blue norther. "Mr. Wells," he said, "this court sees no reason for your claim. Any debt you think you were owed died with your cousin. This case is dismissed." Hiram's face turned beet red. He stormed out of that courthouse and was back in Philadelphia before the week was out. The town was glad to see him go. Outside, Kate turned to Tom, a wave of relief on her face. "It's really over." "Yes, ma'am, it's over," Tom confirmed. "Your land is safe. Your home is safe," he said with a little smile. "And pretty soon it will be our home." Tom then took Kate up to the hilltop that looked out over the whole valley. It was a special place he and Beth used to go to plan their future. He wanted Beth's spirit there with them and to give her blessing, though her letter had already told him she'd be happy for him. It was late in the day, the sun painting the sky. Snow was still on the ground, but you could feel that spring was just around the corner. Kate stood there beside him, looking just as strong and beautiful as the land itself. "Beth and I came here a lot," Tom said quietly. "This here was our spot." He felt Kate get a little still, but he kept on. "I wanted to bring you here because this is where she told me about Daniel. This is where we dreamed together. I just wanted her to be a part of what I am about to ask you." Kate's hand found his and gave it a gentle squeeze. Tom turned, taking both of her hands. "Catherine Rose Wells, you flat out saved my life. You saved my boys. You showed us how to do more than just get by. You are strong and brave and deserve all the good this world has to offer." He then dropped down to one knee. "Would you do me the great honor of being my wife, of being a mother to my boys and building a life with all of us? I know I am not much of a catch, just a widower with 3 boys and a ranch that barely breaks even. But I swear to you I will spend every single day trying to be the man you deserve. I will always honor you, care for you, and love you. So what do you say? Will you marry me?" Kate pulled him right back to his feet. "You don't kneel for me, Tom Brennan. We stand together as partners." "Does that mean yes?" he asked with a hopeful grin. "That means yes." And they shared their first kiss right there as the sun set. It was a kiss blessed by the past, full of hope for a future that stretched out before them like the valley below. Their wedding was 2 weeks later. It was a small, simple thing in the little town church. The whole town showed up. A wedding out on the frontier was for everybody to celebrate. It was a celebration of 2 people choosing each other and of life carrying on. Kate wore her best blue dress, and Tom had bought her a new lace collar for it. She looked beautiful, carrying a little bunch of greenery that Benny had picked for her, tied with a ribbon from Sam. Tom wore his only suit, brushed and mended, looking his very best. Needed mending. The boys stood witness, scrubbed and clean in new shirts Kate had sewn for a parto. They stood tall, knowing this was the day their family was truly being made. Reverend Samuel Price, a man with 62 years of hard-earned wisdom, led the ceremony. He had seen the worst of things and knew that love was the best cure for a broken heart. "Friends," he began, his voice warm and steady, "we are here to witness the joining of Tom and Kate. But we are also watching something more," he continued. "We are watching a family being born. It is born from healing, from the courage to hope again after so much loss." He spoke of Beth and Michael Wells honoring the love that came before this day. He said that old loves just make our hearts bigger for the new loves God sends our way. The vows they shared were simple words, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. When Tom promised to love and cherish Kate, his steady voice finally cracked with emotion. And when Kate promised to care for him and his boys, tears of joy streamed down her face. They exchanged simple silver bands, not fancy, but made strong, solid, and true. But just as the Reverend was about to finish, young Daniel stepped forward. "Reverend, sir? Could we say something?" The old preacher smiled and nodded. "Of course, son." Sam and Benny moved to stand with their brother. Tom's heart nearly burst with pride. "Miss Kate," Daniel said, his voice firm, We wanted to make some promises to you too. You are not just getting a husband today, you are getting us 3 boys. Kate's hand flew to her mouth and she could only nod through a fresh wave of happy tears. I promise to help you, Daniel said, to be the man Pa is teaching me to be. I will listen to you and do my best to always make you proud, he finished. Then Sam spoke softly. I promise to tell you when I am scared and to learn what you teach me. And I will do all my chores without any fuss, he added with a small smile. Finally, little Benny looked up at Kate, his 5-year-old eyes shining with pure love. I promise to love you forever, just like I love Mama Beth up in heaven. And I promise to keep our special Riverstone safe, the one you gave back to me, so we can always remember the storm that brought our family together. Kate fell to her knees and pulled all 3 boys into a fierce hug, sobbing with pure joy. All the lonely years melted away, replaced by the love of 3 boys who had chosen her. Tom knelt and wrapped his arms around them all, his beautiful, broken family, finally made whole. Just beautiful and right. Reverend Beekas's voice was full of emotion when he spoke again. I now pronounce you husband, wife, and family. What God has joined together, let no one put apart. The whole church just lit up with applause and happy cheers. Everyone there was watching more than a wedding. They were seeing 5 people become one whole, healed family. At the party in the church hall, Mrs. Hartford walked over to Kate with a small, wrapped gift. For you, dear. A little something for your new home. Kate opened it and found a beautiful, handmade baby blanket. She gasped. For the grandchildren, Mrs. Hartford said with a warm smile, because families have a way of growing when you least expect it. Kate hugged the older woman tightly. She understood the gift was a sign of acceptance, a blessing for a future filled with joy, not just survival. That evening, after all the celebrating, the family finally went home. Not to Tom's house, but to their home. Tom had been getting it ready, not by erasing Beth, but by making room for Kate. Beth's special chest was in a place of honor, full of memories for the boys. But now Kate's things were there too. Her carved birds sat right on the windowsill. Her own special touch was filling the spaces that had felt empty for so long. The boys ran through the house, full of energy now that they could just be kids again. Kate watched them, smiling, and then she turned to Tom. This is real, is not it? She said, almost in a whisper. It is as real as it gets, Tom promised. You are my wife. They are our sons. And this is our home. Our home, Kate said again, just savoring the words. I surely do like the sound of that. Later that night, after the boys were tucked in, Tom and Kate sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. They watched the same stars from Christmas Eve, but tonight they felt warmer, full of promise. Do you ever think, Kate asked quietly, about how we almost missed all of this? What if that storm had never hit? What if you had taken a different road? I try not to, Tom admitted. It is too scary to think about. But it did happen. We found each other. Kate smiled up at the sky. Or maybe Beth and Michael arranged it all. Maybe they are happy we are not alone anymore. Maybe so, Tom said. He really liked that thought, picturing Beth being happy for him, pleased that her boys had a mother, and that Kate finally had a family of her own. 3 months flew by. Spring came to Montana, and the ranch came alive with new life. Kate's healing skills turned out to be a true blessing for the whole community. Folks from all around knew they could count on Catherine Brennan for help. Tom loved watching her come alive, doing the important work she was meant to do. The boys were doing wonderfully. Daniel learned about ranching from his dad and about compassion from Kate. Sam found his voice again and a passion for helping his new mom with her patients. Benny was the glue that held them all together, a constant source of love. Then one morning late in May, Kate woke up feeling sick to her stomach and bone-tired. It felt different this time. She tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a passing bug, but the feeling lingered for days. Finally, she used the medical training she had to check herself, though she thought it was impossible. What she discovered just did not seem possible. That evening, she and Tom sat on the porch after the boys were asleep, a quiet habit they'd formed. She took his hand, trying to find her nerve. Tom, I've got something to tell you. A familiar fear gripped him, that nagging worry that good things never last. What is it? He asked. Nothing's wrong, she said, her voice shaking. Tom, I am pregnant. The world just stopped for a moment. Tom stared at her, unable to make sense of her words. What? I know, she said. I went to see Dr. Miller. He confirmed it. He said I am about 6 weeks along. Tom was speechless. Pregnant. Kate was pregnant after all this time, especially after the doctors told her it would never happen, that she should accept it. I tried for 3 years with Michael, Kate said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. 3 years of doctors telling me my body was broken, that I could never have a child. And now, after just 3 months with you, she broke down, sobbing with joy and relief. Tom pulled her close, his own tears falling freely. It is a miracle, Kate, a pure miracle. They held on tight under the stars, crying for the lost years and laughing at this impossible gift. Beth would be so happy, Kate whispered. She is, Tom answered without a doubt. I know she is. She wanted us to live and be happy. She wanted us to build a good life. And just look at what we have built. 3 wonderful boys, a loving home, and now this. Our baby. Just then they heard Benny call for a drink of water. Tom stopped Kate from getting up. I will get it. You just rest. He went inside and tucked the little boy back into his bed. Benny was already half asleep, looking more peaceful than he had in a long time. Tom watched him for a second. This child who saw what his own father could not. This boy knew Kate was the answer to a prayer they did not even know how to pray. When he got back to the porch, Kate was gently touching her stomach. A baby, she whispered. Our very own baby. Do you think it is a boy or a girl? It does not matter, Tom said softly. As long as the baby is healthy, the boys are going to be so excited. They sat there holding hands, their future suddenly brighter than they ever dared to dream. What for, Tom? For coming back? For having the courage to ask me? For all of this, she asked, gesturing around. At this house, this ranch, the whole life we've built. For choosing me when you could have just stayed lost in your grief. For letting me be part of your family. Our family, Tom corrected her. It's our family now. Been that way for a good while. And Kate, I'm the one who should be thanking you. For saying yes to a broken man and his 3 lost boys. For making this place a home again. For breathing life back into all of us. We saved each other, darling. That's just what folks do when they love each other, Kate said simply. They save each other. Winter rolled back in just like it always does in Montana. But this one felt different. The house wasn't a tomb anymore. It was alive. It was full of boys laughing and fussing. It was full of Kate's gentle way and her steady, quiet strength. It was full of Tom's own strength, seeing him stand tall again, care for his family, and be a whole father. And all the while, Kate's belly grew bigger. The boys were just thrilled to pieces when they found out. Benny started making plans for the new baby, going on about everything he'd teach his new brother or sister. Sam turned into a little protector, always asking if Kate was feeling all right or if she needed something. And Daniel, well, he just took on more work without being asked, carrying the weight of being the oldest with a heavy grace. On Christmas Eve, 1 year to the day of that terrible storm, the family sat around their table. Kate, ready to pop, seemed to glow in the lamplight. Tom looked at his family, his boys no longer haunted. He looked at the woman who'd brought them all back, at the new life she carried, and felt a gratitude so big it ached. I need to say something, Tom said, and everyone looked at him. A year ago tonight, we were lost out in that storm. We should have been goners, I reckon. But we weren't. We saw a light in a window. We found Kate, and she saved us. You saved me too, Kate said, her voice soft. We saved each other, Tom agreed with a smile. And I just want to say, with us all here together, I'm grateful for the storms that lead us home, grateful for the courage to ask for help, and for the love that comes when you're brave enough to take it. For family, Daniel added. For second chances, Sam put in. For Mama Kate and the baby, Benny finished, and for being happy again. They all joined hands right there. Tom led them in a prayer, thanking God for food, for shelter, for their family, and for love. Thanking God for leading them out of the dark. Outside, the snow started to fall. A gentle snow this time. Not a blizzard, but soft flakes that made everything look clean and new. Inside, the lamp burned bright in the window. It wasn't a signal for help anymore. It was a beacon of welcome, a symbol of home, of a family safe and warm. And in that moment, in that house, there was a deep and quiet peace. There was so much love, more than any of them had ever thought possible. There was a healing they had fought hard for, and there was hope. Hope for the future, for the new baby, and for the life they were building together, one day at a time. Tom Brennan looked at his family and knew his late wife, Beth, had been right all along. Life is for the living, and love is for the brave. Even after losing so much, they found a hard-won happiness. That storm was what first brought them together. But it was pure grit that held them close. The daily choice to build something wonderful from all the broken pieces. They were home, finally, truly, and for good.